Rob Broadhead is founder of RB Consulting. His organization helps leaders get clarity before they commit to big technology or AI decisions, so they know when to move fast, when to pause, and when to change direction. So, with that, Rob, I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Thank you so much. What I want to talk about is before you start, how to know if you're actually ready. And this is, I think, one of the challenges that software projects have all over. We've seen lots of statistics about how they fail on a regular basis and things like that, or they at least fail to succeed 100%. And one of the issues I have found over the years is that a lot of it is starting too soon. And so that's what we want to focus on today. The thing is that most projects don't fail because of the project itself. They actually fail or because of the ideas behind it even. They fail because once we go, nobody pauses first to say, "Hey, are we ready to start?" It's like if you start a race. There's one thing if you are just standing up and you just, the gunshot goes off and you start into your running thing versus being in a proper runner's position. There's a big difference between those two. And it gets even bigger and more noticeable with software projects. Now, the reason we do this is we are pushed to go quickly. As soon as that, signature is not even dry yet, we want to move forward because the markets reward speed. You want to be first to market for a reason. That's not just because somebody made that up. Teams reward action. Most teams, particularly software teams, I feel, don't want to just sit there and think and design. They want to be doing. And that tends to make us want to move quicker. Vendors reward urgency. Everybody wants to buy something and have it there immediately. The current world of instant delivery and instant gratification that you can have something ordered and Amazon will drop it off at your door minutes or hours later makes all of us push more to go quickly. Just the world is speeding up. But speed without clarity creates expensive motion. It's just like if you're trying to get out of a car that's stuck somewhere, it's sometimes better to slowly crawl out of there than to just gun it and try to get out. Because sometimes if you gun it, you end up in more trouble than you were when you started. Projects are no different. So there's a couple myths we also want to talk about here. Uh, Execution is the hard part. That is a myth. It is not usually actually doing the project. Execution actually ends up becoming a problem because it exposes decisions that weren't made or weren't made clear. If you've heard the term about requirements, then from a software point of view, requirements gathering and requirements definition is a very key part of a successful project. Those requirements are effectively decisions that were made. They may be minor decisions like the color of a button or a label somewhere, or they could be much more major decisions. It could be that this data item gets displayed as this data item elsewhere, or this integrates to that system. And if they don't connect, you're going to have problems. Now, what failure really looks like is we end up reworking things. Instead of moving forward, we're having to adjust. We have a quick start and then we go, oh, I'm in the wrong direction. So we have to reset. You end up having meetings instead of decisions. You end up having a lot of discussions, but you come out of them and you just don't feel like anything was resolved. You can't point to it and say, this is what we did in the meeting. These are the outcomes. You end up blaming tools or vendors for foundational gaps. You say that, oh, that tool doesn't do it. This environment doesn't support that. That vendor didn't understand how to solve that problem. Sometimes I'm not going to give a carte blanche to tools and vendors, but sometimes it's not just them or it's not them. It's actually the definition of the problem that is where we really had the original issue occur. Most of the failures are actually quiet and expensive. And by quiet, I mean they don't just scream out and say, hey, you forgot this piece of information, or hey, you designed this right or made a wrong decision here. What ends up happening is further down the road, it causes some sort of a downstream issue. Now you have to fix the issue, you have to track it all the way back, and now it's become much more expensive as opposed to taking the correct course from the start. Now, the missing step that I want to talk about today is before you have the plans, before you go find your vendors and you create your roadmaps, It's the readiness gap. It is the let's get ourselves set for the race that we're about to run. Let's get into that starter position. There's 5 questions to answer before you start. You don't need perfect answers. You just need an answer. You need them owned as well. You need someone to own the answer. You can't just say, well, we'll talk about it or we'll get to it or we're going to hold this in for later. We need to have somebody that is going to say, yes, if I can't define it today, I'm going to be able to give a definitive answer at some hard point in the future, not sometime in the future, but in a week or in 2 weeks or a month, something along those lines. First item I want to talk about is decision ownership. Just talked about this about owning. And this comes down to who can say yes, who can say no, who breaks ties. And the key to this is that if it's not an owned decision, then it's going to stall a project. Now we see this a lot of times if you have instead of a single leader or a single decision maker, you have a board or a group decision. They get lost in these conversations around it. It's politics occur and all these things where you talk and talk and talk and don't become, any closer to a solution, to an answer. So you need to know, and this is important. It's not just who can say yes. So maybe it's who signs the check, who can say, yes, we're going to move forward with this project. You also need to know if it's not them, who can say no. Sometimes, for example, in a software project, you have a product owner that is saying, yes, we want to enforce that feature, that validation. We want to move forward with that piece of the software. However, there may be a manager, a quality assurance person, somebody else that can say no. They can say, you know what, we haven't actually done our due diligence with that yet. So, yes, it's a great feature, but it is not ready for prime time. We're not ready to ship it. The no or no go situation that often happens. And then if there's ties, if let's say there's a product owner and there's a scrum master and they come to loggerheads and one says yes and one says no, who breaks the tie? If you don't have a single person, then you may have ties and you got to make sure that those can be broken. Number two, the inputs and dependencies. We need to know before we start what has to be in place for this to work, for this to be successful. A lot of times, this is where we fall apart. It gets into data, process, and people. And it is, for example, let's take something, let's say sort of simple. Let's say we're building an e-commerce solution, that we're building something to automate our orders. Well, if we don't have behind the scenes, if we don't have in place products to order and that those are properly defined and that we have pricing constraints around those and those kinds of pieces that go into an order, then having a system is not going to help us because we don't have the order. If we don't know what that flow is supposed to be, what happens when somebody signs up, when they say, yes, I'm giving you money to buy this product, what does fulfillment look like? If that's not in place, then you're not going to be ready to go. And you need to know what these things are before you start into the project. If you don't have at least some sort of an answer around it, and sometimes it can be, we are going to decide this. But before you start, you need to know what is the deadline for that decision? Is it something that can be pushed back? And what needs to be at least partially decided? So maybe, let's say you don't have a specific payment processor in place, but you do know that we're going to have a payment processor that takes these kinds of transactions. That sometimes is enough to move forward. But then you need to make sure that your dependencies, like your payment processor, are defined, that you know what they are. And these can be internal and external. So they could be vendors, they could be relationships with certain other systems. Maybe you have to spin something up. They can also be internal. So it may be that you're going to display reports to the HR department. And if the HR department is not ready for those reports, or if they have not given you the proper data, or they're not really sure on what those reports need to be, then that has to be decided before you dive into it. Otherwise, you're going to run the risk of running in a direction that you don't need to go. Number three is the constraints. What is the budget ceilings? What is the timeline? And what is the regulatory or brand limits? And these constraints create clarity. They tell us how fast do we need to move? When do we need to hit the deadline? And what do we have? What are the resources, the people or the money in order to get there? It's just like in a football game, an American football game, you need to know that you cross a goal line. You need to know where that goal line is. You don't want a moving one. So constraints are critical in properly designing a solution and making sure that we are setting expectations properly. Number four, what is the current reality? This sometimes is an issue as well. What systems are actually being used? Everybody's heard about the phantom spreadsheets that are out there somewhere that is used by the accounting department that is critical to their job, but actually isn't tracked within the enterprise. Those kinds of things are critical to identify and understand what they do. And then within that is like, what data is trusted? Where do workarounds exist? This is where those spreadsheets come from, is because they usually don't trust the system that's in place, and then they end up building a workaround. And if you do that, then what you end up doing is you end up short circuiting the system itself. The system is not going to solve the problem because the problem has not been fully and completely and correctly defined. Number five, near term success. What does success look like in 30, 60, 90 days? What proves momentum and what signals this is working? This is really important for our start. If we're thinking about your race again, if you're taking off and it looks like you're moving in the right direction, great, then we can keep moving forward. But if suddenly we see everybody else in the race go off in a different direction, then we may need to pause. And this happens often in software development where we put the end goal too far out and we don't actually give ourselves really good, solid, well defined milestones along the way. So we can end up going off in a wrong direction and we end up drifting further than we want to because then pulling ourselves back becomes more and more of an issue. It's just like if you're on a trip from point A to point B, if you're keep going towards point B, great. But now if you're drifting off, you may end up taking quite a while to get back on track. So what's our goal? What's our deadline? And then how are we going to show that we are actually moving towards that goal? It can be a variety of things. It could be certain documentation that's completed. It could be certain deliverables. It could be demos. It could be feedback from customers. There's a lot of different ways that that can show out. The key is we need to answer that. What does that look like? So what actually breaks? Usually, as I said, rarely it's the tool, rarely it's the vendor. Usually it is unknown decisions and fragile foundations. It is the things that are not actually properly in place when we start the process. If you don't have a good foundation and you start building a house on top of it, the house is not the problem because the contractor and the builders are not the tools. All that stuff is not the problem. It is that the foundation itself is faulty. And that's what we want to avoid. So instead of rushing forward because we want to get there because the vendors love it, the market loves it, our team loves it, we need to think about that because the cost of skipping the pause is always what we look at. We get a faster start, but we also end up with slower outcomes. It's going to take us longer to get there if we don't, if we skip the pause, if we don't spend our time beforehand, because we're going to have to correct. Cleanup is everybody will tell you that is the worst part of it is if we take off in the wrong direction, not only do we have to now do it right, we also have to correct what we did wrong. And that can lead to months of great cleanup. So pause was actually never a cost. It was actually an investment in the future. Simple action that you can take away. Whatever your project is that you're wondering about, if this has triggered you a little bit and said, I wonder if I'm doing this correctly, take a 30-minute pause. Get your team together, whoever the decision makers would be and some of the people involved in it, say, like, what assumptions are we making? Who owns the answers? And what breaks if we wrong? Get those things in place, and we're going to be able to assess our risk. It's not that hard. 30-minute pause. Just get ready together, ask those three questions, maybe even present that beforehand so people can think about it and see what comes out of it. Wrapping up, I just want to emphasize starting is not the risky part. Starting without clarity is. We want to start. We want to get going. We want a as rapid as possible solution that we can get out to our customers, to whoever our users are going to be. But if we start without clarity, we're going to end up going in the wrong direction. Thank you for your time.